Day 565 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at the Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 269,000 military personnel losses, with this amount representing an additional 580 losses in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 6 tanks, 12 APVs, and a genuinely whopping 28 artillery. But just as importantly, 3 air defense systems and 32 vehicles and fuel tankers combined. Then we'll head into the map on the Luhansk axis today, as Russian troops maintained their offensive actions along the Kupiansk and Crimea line in the last day. However, there was still no verified instances of progress in this case, and if I were the Russian MOD, I'd honestly pull everything out of every other oblast except for the Donbass oblasts, which comprises of Donetsk and the Luhansk oblasts, for a chance to take the Donbass in this war, which is still quite impossible given the uncaptured land still to take. But I'd also have to say that the Russian administration's eyes are bigger than their stomachs. As such, they will simply not abandon their positions all throughout Ukraine, but instead will continue to unquestionably exert and stretch their resources way too thin as they seek to have their cake and eat it too. Not to mention they would be in political ruin and lose their power from a move like that. Then, speaking of the Donbass, somewhere in the east, a Russian BM-21 Grad takes a Ukrainian precision counter-battery strike. And it's always a fortunate day when we see one of these heavy artillery or really multiple rocket launcher platforms gets destroyed. Then we'll head across today to the southern front lines as the Ukrainian armed forces made advances around Priutne, which is just another example of how the AFU is creating multiple pressure points for the Russian troops in the Zaporizhia direction, which certainly makes it extremely difficult for an invading force to contend with. Then we move across to the main activity contact points as Ukrainian forces continued to gradually advance between Novoprokopivka and Verbova, and specifically with the AFU taking up new positions just north and east of Novoprokopivka. In fact, right now this is where the fighting is at its heaviest with both armies, as there are currently some pretty short-ranged mechanized brigade drills occurring right now. Think tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. And Russian military telegram channels have expressed persistent problems hindering Russian operations along this front line. And then I'd also like to show, in this region, we have an example of a Russian SPG howitzer that was vaporized, and I do not use that term lightly because after the hit from a Ukrainian FPV drone, it then turned into one of the biggest explosions I've ever seen from a single piece of armor. Not the biggest, but still one of the biggest. But more importantly for this region is the Russian troop movements in this sector, as Russia has most recently been forced to move their 76th Air Assault Division to the southern front, which is really a pretty telling admission that Ukrainian progression in the region has reached such critical levels for the Russian invasion army that they are even forced to deploy one of their offensive forces for defensive operations instead. Then add to that the attrition rates of the regular Russian army, as it very much appears that elements needed for either army right now is a combination of stamina and patience, as opposed to attriting military personnel forces in such high volumes. Then we'll move across to the Black Sea with some really breaking news right now. So the Ukrainian forces executed a bold operation to reclaim drilling rigs known as the Boyko Towers in the Black Sea. Now, firstly, note they had been captured by Russia in the initial stages of the war for what is no doubt a huge blow to the Russian military now that they've been liberated by the Ukrainian forces there. Because apart from being oil and gas resource platforms, they can also be used by Russia for staging grounds and military operations. And I've referred to the Boyko Towers previously as Snake Island 2.0 because these hydrocarbon platforms are simply located too close to Ukraine and would inevitably be taken back anyway, just like Snake Island was. Now, there is more rigs to be taken, but I do expect Ukraine to achieve all of their liberations in time. Then just briefly, we'll head into Crimea as in some very ominous words from the spokesperson of Ukraine's Operational Command South, as they said that the Kerch Bridge will soon be no longer fully functional. And this is in response to Russian repairs on the bridge, almost completed now from the last successful hit from about 2 months ago in mid-July. The spokesperson also said that the construction and repairs carried out by Russia on the bridge are redundant, which certainly feels like a pretty accurate statement. Then just lastly, for this peninsula, local Ukrainian partisans are feeling the change in times, it seems, as they posted to social media some audacious actions as they put up the Ukrainian flag at night in Jankoy. Then we'll head across to some news for today. So we'll start out once again with some hardware news. So Ukraine has made a significant announcement regarding its collaboration with Sweden in the production of CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles. So together the two nations have embarked on a joint venture aimed at manufacturing 1,000 CV-90 IFVs. Just a staggering number, really. And the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Defense revealed that these vehicles will feature enhanced all-terrain capabilities and reinforced multi-layer armor, signifying a substantial upgrade in the military capabilities of the Ukrainian forces. Then in some more hardware or hardware-adjacent news, Poland will sign a deal tomorrow to buy 486 HIMARS systems, roughly $10 billion worth. And I'd be willing to bet at some point, sometime into the future, perhaps a few of those will cheekily be making it across the borders to Ukraine. Then in some Russian hardware news, so with this one, I'd like to congratulate the Russian Motorized Rifle and Tank Regiment on their brand spanking new T-55 tanks. Now, they do their best to dress it all up with the wide angles and the fire bursts on the footage, but let's see. No upgraded armor, no internal optics or system upgrades, short range fire with no stabilizers. My goodness. You wouldn't even need a tank-busting Javelin anti-tank guided missile for these ancient creatures. In fact, it's literally not even worth the cost of a Javelin missile to take out. Better to use an older Soviet RPG platform that can penetrate around 500 millimeters deep of armor, which is a lot more than what this stock 100 millimeter thin armor possesses. So these are effectively 70-year-old rolling coffins. Just the 5 too, it seems. Then in some other news, US General Mark Milley has said that Ukraine will likely have about 30 to 45 days for the counteroffensive before the weather worsens on the ground, as he referred to the muddy Rasputitsa season coming up soon. However, everybody's favorite and emotionless Ukrainian military intelligence chief Bordanov also said that Ukraine plans to continue the offensive operations no matter the weather conditions. So this 30 to 45 day mark or timeline for current decent weather could be more of a Russian timeline for getting their act together on the front lines, where they are largely defending as opposed to invading, like the invading force that they initially started as. But we've certainly come a long way from those days, it seems. Then in some other news, as back to those fraudulent sham elections in the Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine, Many civilians choose to write protests on the ballot papers themselves instead. With too many to show, but as you can see, with some uploaded photos to social media, some of the things they write translate into certain things like it's not an election, it's all lies, or elections without choice, freedom to all the political prisoners, or stop the war, with some throwing in some swear words for good measure, or Russia, wake up, no war, Putin is a murderer, or no war, a tribunal for Putin. So, not big fans of Putin, not to mention for sham elections either. Then moving across to some funnies to round it all off today, guys. So, someone took an artsy snap of a military enlistment bus ad in Russia. And artsy because it includes trash bags well placed at the bottom. Given how there's a lot of memes out there at the moment of Russian soldiers and body bags on the internet, seeming to be synonymous with one another. And interestingly, I'll say here, Russian officials mentioned recently explaining that these ads simply do not work like they used to, and that people won't even enlist for big money these days. And many sources now indicate that Russia has depleted its available and willing volunteers for this war. Gee, I wonder why. Oh, and the ad literally says, join your friends. Join your friends? How? Join them in death? Not a good ad in general. Then, as a final funny to round it all off for today, guys, so you've heard of cope cages for tanks. Now there's cope tents for Russian fighter jets. So this one was spotted in the Russian wild, and I don't even know where to start with this one, but I'll try my best. So for starters, even the cheapest drones will cause damaging shockwave effects, putting the jet out of service for at least a few months. And that's just the impact drones. There's also the different payload fragmentation drones that will spray a rain of shrapnel everywhere onto its target. Not to mention, Ukrainian drones are now more than ever flying together in multiple sorties to finish off anything they've started. And truly, they're seeming to get more proficient with each and every wave. Oh, then of course there's the most obvious situation of flying a first-person view, or FPV, drone horizontally into its destination like we've already seen so much of in the past. But then, more importantly, it's not even concealing the location of the jet. I mean, it seems Russia will do anything not to build aircraft hangars. They just seem to think they have great weather all year round and no enemies, apparently. But what you're really seeing here right now is a nation not ready for war that is now scrambling around to defend its assets while losing all credibility. Now, I don't know if this MiG-29 with the red star on the top right, you'll see there, is used for spare parts or whatnot, but this is not a sufficient approach for the world's second army to act in this way. And realistically, Russia don't appear to have the time or resources to upgrade to aircraft hangars on their airfields, which are surprisingly quite hangarless and wide open to compromise. Although I do envisage a time shortly into the future where Russia will build a bunch of cheap steel hangars that will inevitably fall under the weight of a drone explosion, collapsing the entire structure and taking the quote-unquote protected aircraft with it in the process. So that will be it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment, and yeah, I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.